What would you do if the president himself stopped his convoy in front of your tiny workshop and called you by name? Pause, wind whistles. The sound of a distant horn. The sun over Ouagadougou burned without mercy that day. The heat was so thick it felt like the air itself was melting. Above the cracked asphalt, waves of heat shimmered like a mirage, twisting the city into something unreal. Cars rattled by, engines coughing, horns blaring. Motorbikes weaved through chaos, leaving behind clouds of red dust that stuck to every face, every shirt, every heartbeat. And in the middle of it all, at a forgotten corner where the city's noise turned into an echo, stood a man named Thomas. His clothes were torn, marked by oil and time. His fingers, blackened from years of grease, moved with quiet precision as he bent over the hood of an old pickup truck. Every movement told a story, of struggle, of survival, of a man who refused to surrender. Thomas wasn't always a mechanic. Once he was a name teachers said with pride. The boy who solved math problems others couldn't even understand. He dreamed not of riches, but of building roads, machines, a future for Burkina Faso that would outlast him. But fate, it doesn't always honor dreams. When a fire swallowed his home and took his parents at 16, Thomas buried his textbooks beneath ashes. He became both brother and father to his little sister Miriam, an old villager. A retired mechanic with trembling hands and kind eyes took him under his wing. From that man, Thomas learned more than just how to fix engines. He learned patience. He learned dignity. He learned that even broken things can run again, if you believe they're worth saving. Years passed. Thomas opened a small workshop in the city, a single corrugated roof fighting against the sun. The signboard hung crooked, but his heart never did. Each morning he whispered to himself the same words. If I stay honest and keep working, maybe better days will come. But the city was cruel to dreamers. Customers shouted when repairs took too long. Some left without paying. Some mocked him for believing that honesty could feed a family. Yet Thomas never changed. He never overcharged, never lied, never gave less than his best. Because deep inside he believed God sees everything. Then came that afternoon, the day that would change everything. The street was the same. The heat, the noise, the sweat, all unchanged. Until suddenly, silence, engines slowed. Heads turned. A whisper moved through the air like a spark. It's the president's convoy. A line of black cars rolled down the road, their tinted windows glinting in the sun. The sound of polished engines filled the air, clean, powerful, almost out of place in this dusty street. Two men in dark suits stepped out, scanning every corner. Their earpieces glinted under the light. Children froze mid-play. Women covered their faces, whispering prayers. Thomas didn't even look up. He was crouched beside a motorcycle, hands deep in metal, sweat dripping onto the pavement. Big men in big cars don't pay my bills, he muttered. He tightened the final bolt, unaware that destiny was already standing behind him. Then the car door opened. A tall figure stepped out, posture straight, presence commanding. His uniform pressed to perfection, his gaze sharp as an eagle's. The crowd hushed. President Ibrahim Traoré stood under the sun, his eyes sweeping across the street, scanning faces, searching. And then they stopped. On Thomas for a heartbeat, neither man moved. Then with a voice steady but softened by memory, the president spoke. Thomas? The mechanic froze. His hands paused mid-motion. He didn't turn immediately. Years of hard life had trained him not to believe in miracles. 1 minute, he said quietly, tightening another bolt. The crowd gasped. A mechanic making the president wait? Impossible. But Traoré only smiled. The kind of smile that comes from recognition, not offense. As Thomas stood and wiped the sweat from his brow, their eyes met. Two men from the same soil, now worlds apart. And in that silence under the burning African sun, something greater than politics filled the air. It was respect. It was memory. It was destiny. Circling back, slow fade out, soft music rises, the hum of the city returning. Narrator, low voice. None of the bystanders could have guessed. This meeting, on this dusty corner, would soon change the fate of both men. And maybe the nation itself. Thomas didn't look up at first. He thought he must have misheard. Heat can play tricks on the mind. But then the voice came again, stronger, trembling with something more than authority. "Thomas, is that really you?" The sound froze the air. Even the engines seemed to hold their breath. Thomas slowly straightened, wiping the sweat from his brow with a grease-stained rag. When his eyes finally rose, time itself seemed to stop. Standing before him was Ibrahim Traoré, not the soldier, not the president, but Ibrahim, the boy he once shared dreams with beneath a mango tree in their old village. Thomas's lips parted, voice barely a whisper. "Ibrahim." The crowd erupted into murmurs, the disbelief rippling like a wave through the street. Bodyguards stepped forward, hands half raised, uncertain whether to stop what was unfolding. But before they could move, the president took 3 long strides, the kind that cut through ceremony and memory alike, and wrapped his arms around Thomas, a deep, trembling embrace. No cameras, no titles, just 2 souls colliding after years of silence. "My brother," Ibrahim whispered, his voice breaking. "I can't believe it's really you," the onlookers gasped. The president of Burkina Faso, holding a roadside mechanic in his arms, tears streaking his face, unguarded, unashamed. Some filmed, others simply stared, frozen by the raw humanity of the moment. Thomas's chest tightened. He hadn't seen Ibrahim since they were boys, running barefoot through the red soil of their village, chasing dreams bigger than themselves. They once swore they would change the country together, but life had split their paths. One rose to power, the other knelt beside broken engines, keeping faith alive through honest work. Ibrahim's voice came again, soft, aching. "You promised we'd change this country side by side, Thomas. How did I let this happen to you?" Thomas smiled faintly, a smile that carried years of struggle and peace. "You didn't, Ibrahim. Life just took us on different roads." Ibrahim's hands gripped his friend's shoulders. "Then tell me everything. Come with me now. Leave this place." But Thomas shook his head gently. "I can't. I've got customers waiting." The crowd laughed nervously. No one could believe it. But Thomas was serious. Duty was duty, no matter who stood before him. Ibrahim looked around at the tools, the unfinished motorcycle, the old stool that wobbled under the sun. Then, to everyone's astonishment, he said quietly, "Then I'll sit here with you." And he did. The president of Burkina Faso, whose every second was planned by aides and calendars, lowered himself onto a cracked wooden stool beside his childhood friend. Gasps rippled through the gathering. Phones lifted, cars slowed to a crawl. Even the dust seemed to hang in the air, unwilling to settle. But Ibrahim didn't care. In that moment, he wasn't a president. He was a boy again, sitting beside the one person who had always reminded him what truth felt like. The two sat side by side under the tin roof of Thomas's workshop. Sunlight filtered through drifting dust, painting golden halos around them. The air shimmered, heavy but holy, like time had folded itself to honor their reunion. No one dared interrupt. The guards, once stiff and alert, now stood quietly in awe. The people watched, and for once saw a leader not above them but among them. Ibrahim looked at Thomas and smiled softly. "You haven't changed at all. Still stubborn, still humble." Thomas chuckled, eyes glinting. "And you're still dramatic. Sitting here beside a dirty mechanic in front of half the city. Look at your guards, they look ready to faint." Ibrahim laughed through his tears. "Let them. Maybe they need to see this. Maybe we all do." He paused, his voice turning solemn, almost prophetic. "Power means nothing without loyalty and truth. You were always the one who reminded me of that, Thomas." Thomas's expression softened, the years of distance melting away. For a moment he saw not the president, not the soldier, but his friend, the same boy who used to share bread and laughter beneath the setting sun. Thomas tilted his head, his smile widening. "Do you remember the day we stole mangoes from old man Kiboli's farm?" Ibrahim grinned, eyes lighting up like a child again. "How could I forget? He chased us halfway to the river." They both laughed, a deep, genuine laughter that pulled years of pain out of their chests and threw it into the wind. Around them, the city didn't just pause, it listened. For the first time in a long time, people saw something sacred, two friends divided by fate, united by heart. Some reunions rewrite history. Some remind us that even the most powerful men are just boys who once dreamed together. And some carry a message meant for the whole nation. But what Ibrahim said next would change the life of every person listening. They laughed, remembering the days of barefoot mischief and shared dreams. But soon, the laughter faded into something deeper. Ibrahim leaned forward, his eyes glimmering with memory. You ran so fast that day. Thomas, your shoe flew straight into the river, but you still came back for me. He chuckled softly, then his voice broke. That's when I knew. You were different, Thomas smiled faintly. And you told me that one day, we'd lead this country together. The president's smile slowly disappeared, replaced by a shadow of regret. And I told you I'd never lose you, Ibrahim whispered. But you had your sister to care for. I should have searched for you, Thomas. I should have helped. Thomas looked down at his hands, scarred, hardened, yet gentle. Hands that had held wrenches instead of diplomas, burdens instead of dreams. I don't blame you, he said quietly. I'm proud of you, Ibrahim. Look at what you've done for our people. But Ibrahim lowered his head. The crowd noise softened around them as his words came out heavy, almost like confession. But how can I say I'm changing this country when the brightest boy I ever knew still fights just to survive? Silence. Only the sound of the afternoon breeze passing through rusted tools and loose tin. Then, suddenly, a small voice broke through the stillness. Papa. Papa. A little girl, maybe 10 years old, came running down the street, her dress fluttering, her feet coated in dust. She skidded to a stop beside Thomas, breathless. Mama says come home early and there's no firewood to cook the rice. She looked up and froze. Her eyes widened at the tall man standing beside her father. Papa. Is that the president? The crowd chuckled softly. Thomas smiled, crouching beside her. Yes, sweetheart. This is Uncle Ibrahim. The president's eyes softened instantly. He bent down, smiling warmly. Come here, little one. The girl hesitated for a heartbeat, then stepped forward, small arms wrapping around the most powerful man in the country. Ibrahim held her close, his voice trembling with something sacred. She's beautiful, he whispered. What's her name? Amina, Thomas replied proudly. My pride and joy. Ibrahim's face grew serious, his gaze lingering on her. She deserves more than this, Thomas. You've carried enough. Let me help. Thomas rose slowly, wiping his hands on his dusty trousers. He looked Ibrahim in the eyes, not as a poor man to a leader, but as one equal soul to another. I don't need charity, Ibrahim. I need a promise. The president's eyes hardened with resolve. Anything, Thomas took a breath, his voice steady but heavy with truth. Promise me you'll build a country where no child has to leave school just to survive. Promise you'll protect the honest, the hard-working, the ones who never gave up. For a long moment, Ibrahim said nothing. Then he reached out, gripping Thomas's hand firmly. Soldier to friend, brother to brother. I promise. On my honor, he said, his voice deep and solemn. And I'll begin today, with you. Music swells, soft choral tones rising. That evening, back at the presidential palace, the golden lights burned late into the night. Ibrahim stood before his ministers in the grand hall, the same hall where laws were debated, where ambition often drowned out compassion. But tonight, his words came from somewhere higher. Today, he began, his voice echoing across the marble floor. I sat beside a man who reminded me why I became president, a man who works with his hands, who carries the weight of this country without complaint. We speak of change, yet it is men like him who are the change. He looked around the room, eyes blazing with conviction. We must do more. We must lift up the people who hold this nation together with bare hands and honest hearts. Quiet heroes, unseen, unrewarded, but unbreakable. The ministers listened in silence, unsure how to respond to a fire they hadn't seen in their leader before. Ibrahim didn't mention Thomas by name, but the memory of that dusty street corner burned bright within him, and with it, a vow he would never break. Meanwhile, across town, Thomas walked home beneath the crimson sunset, holding Amina's small hand. Neighbors peeked from doorways, whispering as they passed. The man they had always pitied now walked with the quiet dignity of someone remembered, someone seen. But Thomas didn't care for their whispers or their sudden respect. All that mattered was this: his friend had remembered him, and maybe, Just maybe, that meant something was about to change. Not just for him, but for everyone like him. The next morning dawns warm, golden light washing over Ouagadougou. The city stirred awake. Vendors called from street corners. Radios hummed with morning news. And in his tiny workshop, Thomas was already at work, crouched beside a battered motorcycle, tightening its chain, humming a familiar tune under his breath. For him, life was the same until he heard the sound, engines. Not one, many. He looked up. Traffic slowed. People turned. Murmurs rose like a wave. Then his heart stopped. A black convoy, official, unmistakable, rolled to a halt right in front of his workshop. This time, it wasn't chance. This time, it was destiny, coming back with purpose. Men in suits and crisp uniforms jumped out first. Crowds gathered again, pressing closer, holding their breath. Thomas wiped his hands, eyes narrowing. "What now, old friend?" He whispered. What came next would prove that a single meeting can awaken an entire nation. By the next morning, word had spread like fire through the streets of Ouagadougou. Neighbors pressed close to one another, whispering the same impossible rumor. The president is coming back. No one believed it at first. Not twice. Not here. But then the black convoy appeared again, shining like obsidian under the burning sun. Engines purred in unison. Doors opened, and from the middle car stepped out President Ibrahim Traoré. This time he was not alone. Behind him came journalists, cameramen, ministers, soldiers. The entire eye of the nation. Lenses clicked. Flags rippled in the wind. And right beside Thomas's tiny, oil-stained workshop stood something new, a small wooden stage, a microphone, 2 loudspeakers humming softly, waiting for words that would soon echo through history. Thomas stood frozen, confusion written across his face. "Ibrahim, what is all this?" he called out. The president smiled, walking toward him through the crowd. "Thomas," he said gently, "yesterday I cried, but today I came to honor." He turned, stepped onto the stage, and took the microphone in his hands. The murmurs faded until all that remained was silence. The kind of silence that only comes before something unforgettable. People of Burkina Faso. "Today I want you to meet my friend." He paused, looking down at Thomas, who stood motionless, wiping his hands on his worn trousers. "Not just any friend. This man was the top of our class. When I was failing mathematics, he stayed late to teach me. When I was hungry, he shared his food. And when tragedy struck his life, he gave up his own dreams to care for his little sister." Gasps rippled through the crowd. Phones lifted higher. Some people whispered his name. Others simply stared, realizing that greatness had been living quietly beside them all along. Ibrahim's voice deepened, trembling with emotion. "While I became your president." He worked humbly, faithfully by this roadside. Yesterday he reminded me of what true service means. He did not ask for money. He did not ask for comfort. He asked me for a promise to fight for people like him. For the honest, the hardworking, the forgotten. The silence broke. A wave of applause surged through the crowd. Even the soldiers clapped. Some of the reporters lowered their cameras, wiping their eyes. Then Ibrahim raised his hand for quiet. "Today," he said, voice resolute, "I make good on that promise." He turned toward Thomas. "From this moment, you will no longer work by the roadside." Gasps again, louder this time. "Your workshop will become a national training center. A place where young men and women can learn to repair, to create, to stand on their own 2 feet. You will lead them, Thomas, as teacher, as mentor, as example. The building is ready. The tools are waiting. A team of engineers will work by your side." Thomas stood still, his wrench slipping from his hand and clattering onto the concrete. His lips trembled. "Ibrahim, I don't know what to say." The president wasn't done. "And one more thing," he said, voice soft but unshakable. "Your daughter, Amina, she will have a full scholarship. Any school she chooses, all the way to university. Your family will move into a new home, safe, clean, and fully yours. Not because of charity, Thomas, but because of honor." The words hit Thomas like a wave. His knees buckled, his chest heaved, and tears, long buried behind years of struggle, finally broke free. He covered his face with oil-stained hands as the crowd erupted. Applause thundered. Cheers rose through the streets like song. Some shouted his name. Others cried openly, their voices breaking in pride. "Long live the president! Long live Thomas!" Flashbulbs burst like tiny suns. Journalists shouted questions. But in the middle of all that noise, Thomas could only whisper through his tears, "All I ever wanted was to be remembered." Ibrahim stepped down from the stage, walked over, and embraced him once more. Their foreheads touched, one in uniform, one in oil and dust. And for a brief, sacred moment, there was no difference between them. Then, the president took his hand and gently guided him toward the stage. Thomas climbed slowly, trembling, and stood before the microphone. The crowd fell silent again, waiting for his voice. He looked out at the sea of faces, at his daughter, standing tall in the front row, her eyes shining. He cleared his throat, gripping the microphone with shaking hands. I don't know what to say," he began, voice cracking. "I never wanted fame. I never wanted reward. I just wanted to do what was right." He paused, the emotion thick in his throat. "But I'm not the only one. There are thousands like me across this land. Men and women who wake before sunrise, who work until their hands bleed, who pray quietly that tomorrow might be a little kinder. Please, don't forget them." He turned to Ibrahim, eyes wet but steady. "You remembered me, my brother. Now remember them." For a moment, the air itself seemed to hold its breath. Then thunderous applause, a roar that shook the street, echoing off every rooftop. That day, something changed in Burkina Faso. Not just laws, not just plans, but hearts. Because sometimes, the greatest revolutions don't begin in palaces. They begin in small workshops with men who refuse to stop believing in goodness. And as the sun set over the city, the world saw what true leadership looked like. A president who knelt beside the people, and a mechanic who reminded him why he stood. "Thank you, my brother, not just for this, but for remembering who you are." That night, the image of a president embracing a roadside mechanic spread across Burkina Faso. People cried. People believed again. Days later, Thomas's loyalty was tested when two strangers offered him money to betray the president. He refused and risked everything to warn Ibrahim. The plot was stopped. Lives were saved. At a national ceremony, President Ibrahim spoke before the nation. This man was offered riches and power, but chose truth instead. The crowd roared as Thomas, Esther, and Amina stood together, symbols of courage and honesty. Amina received a full scholarship, and Esther was gifted a supermarket in her name. That evening, Thomas raised his glass. To friendship, to truth. And in his palace, Ibrahim whispered to the stars, "Some presidents are protected by guards and guns, but I am protected by a friend." In the heart of Africa, one act of loyalty reminded the world. True friendship and goodness still have the power to change a nation.